Should we get to this thing where Sam Harris called me psychopathic? Let's talk about this because apparently they wanted me to, and I will. So this guy, Eric Weinstein, is a member of the IDW. He works for Peter Thiel as one of his economists. He's self-identifies as a longtime liberal who is disaffected like Dave Rubin and how authoritarian the left has become or whatnot. He went on Joe Rogan, and we played that clip, said that I was leading a band of people who were trying to take out Dave Rubin like a wounded caribou or something to that effect. Which, I guess if you want to do a shorthand, that's probably accurate. I mean, not take out. All I wanted was to make sure that he was properly defined, so that when mostly young adults and kids come across Dave Rubin's animated shows that were paid for by PragerU or whatever it is, that they understand that his perspective is actually of the right. And subsequent to that, he started working for Turning Points USA, which is a right-wing college organization. Subsequent to that, he worked for The Blaze. And I don't know how any self-respecting, even someone who is attempting to pretend to care about genuine intellectual discourse, would associate themselves with Glenn Beck. Honestly. Like, I don't even know how you can pretend to do that. I understand how you can pretend. I just don't understand how you can pretend and think you're going to get away with it by being on The Blaze.
Wait, I thought Glenn Beck was woke now.
Even if he's woke, the idea that you're going to try and brand yourself as some type of like intellectual stuff is the most important thing. But no, he's unwoke. He went through that cycle. It took
did not last long.
Took a year. And so Eric Weinstein has a podcast. I don't know who's been on the portal, but I presume it's been the same. You know, they have a coffee clatch where all these same guys, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris, they all go on each other's podcasts and tell each other how deeply intellectual they are and how they are arguing in good faith. And that's the most important thing.
Peter Thiel was the first guest, and the whole conversation was like, how do we have this conversation given that we have different views? And the answer is, Peter Thiel's your boss.
Right. I mean, like the idea that they're actually exploring something is sort of fascinating, that they maintain this fiction for themselves, right? And it's not just that they maintain that fiction for themselves. I mean, anybody can delude yourselves if you want.
Well, they're exploring how unfair it is that nobody likes them.
Well, it's also that they're convincing themselves that there's something that they really aren't. And they're also attempting, obviously, to convince everyone else, but you know, that's what they're doing. And it's all this sort of like overly intellectual. Now, after his appearance on Rogan, I tweeted something at him. I can't remember what it was. We had some exchange, and we ended up on the phone. Because and I'm not whining about this. They're certainly the prerogative. But as you know, Dave Rubin refused to have me on his show, even though he claimed he was about to, because Michael did a video about him that was labeled by our YouTube person as being calling Dave Rubin stupid. And so I apologized to Rubin publicly. I pulled the video down. But Rubin said, that's why I'm not going to have you on the show, because you're beyond the pale. Calling me stupid is beyond the pale. Now, of course, Dave has since now said that it's okay for Donald Trump to call him a fag. I'm sorry, I'm just using the word that he used. And you can be on my show. He's invited people who he claims slandered or libeled him onto his show. But because Michael did a video that we put in the title, it says Dave Rubin's stupid, that becomes his excuse not to engage with me.
Well, we all know being an intellectual is a cornerstone of his identity, whereas being gay is kind of an afterthought.
Right. But nevertheless, I apologized. And we took the video down.
That video doesn't exist anymore.
That video does not exist anymore. Now, people can argue whether or not I should have done that, but I wanted to make it clear that I thought Dave was being a little disingenuous, that he just wanted to avoid an actual debate. Eric Weinstein. We spoke on the phone for an hour. Why? Not because I'm really interested in talking to Eric Weinstein, not because I don't have a bunch of other things to do, but because I want to make it clear that at the very least, I'm coming from a sincere set of beliefs and that I have an agenda that I'm perfectly willing to articulate to him, just as I've articulated to you. I wanted to make sure that Dave Rubin was not labeled as the last liberal or whatever it was he was trying to call himself, that he was actually being honest and above board with what his agenda was. And that was to mainstream some ideas that were right-wing ideas, and he was sort of mislabeling us. I mean, he told Stefan Molyneux, you and I represent the new center. That's not, by any definition, that's not true. And I was just engaging with that definition. And I do the same thing with Sam Harris and whatnot. Remember, Sam Harris, when I first got into it with Sam Harris, it was years ago, and it was about a piece he wrote in the Huffington Post called In Defense of Torture. Literally. In defense of torture. He wrote it on the Huffington Post, which you have to understand, particularly at that time, I think it was 2005, was it? Was the premier political website in the country for anybody who was left of Matt Drudge. It was the marquee site, a political site. And now Harris since linked back to a post on his, blog saying people misunderstood this thing in defense of torture. This is not where an editor, incidentally, comes in with the title. You write your own titles at that time for Huffington Post. I don't know what they do now. And there was a massive debate in this country about torture at that time, political debate. He was trying to just do a thought experiment. And we went back and forth on that thought experiment on Twitter. And for him, the thought experiment is completely narrow. It's actually indicative of a lot of his problems, is that he doesn't see a broader context to anything he's talking about. Whatever is just in his mind is, get some type of pass, even though he wants to broadcast it on Huffington Post. Like it has no implications. Like coming out and writing in defense of torture is not a political act, even if it's done on a premier political website. So this guy is on with Eric Weinstein and apparently thinks that my behavior is psychopathic. Play it.
Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. The focus on ridicule. I think it's hard to remember, Country Joe and the Fish was ridiculing a bad war in terms that are ridiculous. You've now got a group of people who, if a mathematician says, that in different arithmetics, you could have an equation like 2 + 3 = 1. And so then you get somebody saying,
now, incidentally, the reason why he's saying mathematicians is he wants to pretend and have the listener believe that when we talk about Sam Harris trying to mainstream race IQ garbage, that's like attacking math. That's why he's doing it. That's why he's saying mathematician. He's not saying when we have people who come on and talk about eugenics, or when we have people who come on and talk about killing babies, or it's math. It's math. I'm attacking people because they're doing math properly. That's what it is, according to the perspective that they have.
Looking over there at Princeton, but well, that's ridicule, but you're ridiculing something that you strawmanned and didn't understand,
right?
Because the person actually was making sense. And so what I see is that the left, and in particular the Sam Seder crowd, has
doing that with abandon.
Well, it's willing to do two separate things. Sam is quite willing. Like there's this whole thing about, will you talk to Sam Seder? Will you debate Sam Seder? And my feeling is, I would debate part of Sam Seder, the part that just is focused on the ideas, but the part that is kind of like nasty and ridiculing and doing the Alinsky thing, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not interested. I've spoken to Sam Seder on the phone. It's perfectly reasonable, made sense to me. We disagreed on positions, but
well, the line that gets crossed from me always.
Now just think about the mentality of someone who is going to say it's perfectly reasonable, but there are aspects of Sam I don't like. And so therefore, despite the fact that my entire brand is built upon this idea of exchange of ideas, because there's things about Sam that I don't understand or appreciate, I'm not going to have a public discourse about it. I'm just going to give you, Sam Harris, an opportunity to call him psychopathic in the way that he acts.
Reasonable, made sense to me. We disagreed on positions, but
well, the line that gets crossed for me always with these guys, and again, it's disproportionately on the left, is the line of conscious dishonesty. I mean, it's your brother's aphorism: bad faith changes everything.
Bad faith changes everything.
And I mean, these guys are in bad faith. They know they're lying about, in my case, my views, my actual beliefs, and
not all of them.
There's just too much information.
Well, David Pakman.
No, David Pakman's fine. I just did his podcast.
Yeah, I know. But David Pakman said some pretty non-charitable things in some parts that seemed kind of ridiculing. And
of me?
I think you, me, other people.
Well, I've never seen him misrepresenting my views. And I think that, I don't know him. I just did his podcast once, but he seems like somebody who, if I said, listen, you got me wrong here, that would matter, and he would make an effort to get me
and that's
get me
the
right.
thing, which is the problem that we have increasingly is that the tactics that are being used in what are called progressive circles have been confused with the content. So that is, the objections to the vehicle, which might be Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, is conflated with the
totally
payload.
Unethical.
Pause it. So in other words, unless you're willing to take what I say in the way that I want you to say it, you're acting in bad faith. And here's the little trick that they're going to play. If you're not willing to take what I say in the way that I want you to take it, then I'm going to deem you unworthy of actually having an exchange with me. And therefore, I can't be accused of being less than intellectually curious as I am, because you are not part of a caste that is really one that you could measure. So I am having all critics come at me. I just am defining critics in a narrow way that doesn't include people who won't accept what I say is the gospel. Continue.
Program for smearing people dishonestly.
Well, it's an immoral technology.
It's an ends justify the means.
That's the big problem on the left.
Yeah. So, but that ethic is flawed, right? So for instance, like with me and Trump, like there's nobody who
you don't like the guy
denigrates Trump as avidly as I do, but I am super careful, to be honest. Right. So it's not that anything you can smear him with is fair.
Because
right?
You can be, Sam. The problem with
all these guys can be. Sam Seder can be honest on his show and still have a show. Right. Nobody's going to cancel him because he was too honest.
No, I think that there's
I take phone calls every day. I take IMs every day. If anybody wants to debate me, I go and debate them. If anybody wants to show and point out where I've been dishonest, it's the way you get to the front of the line on these calls.
Accountability.
Totally. But I am being dishonest about Donald Trump or about Sam Harris. Maybe both.
Like this very weird other I mean, I don't want to get into the Sam Seder thing in particular. First of all, because he's going to do an entire show. We know you have to say it.
He'll take these quotations and
but he has. See,
I will. I will. And if you have a problem with it, invite me onto your show. Come on to my show. Let's go. We'll go to the Y, wherever you want to go. 92nd Street Y. We can have a debate about it. Oh, but I understand. I'm psychopathic in my behavior, and therefore not worthy of actually having some discourse. So you're going to bring me up on your show repeatedly, but we can't really.
And he'll probably respond to this too.
Right, of course. Of course he will, because that's the kind of stuff he does. Continue.
He has Pacman's ability to reason. I mean,
this is the banality of evil, right? Like, there's not that many evil people, right? There's just a lot of people who are functioning in some normal mode with normal incentives, and they become assholes because they're not heroes, right? But so, like, it takes some work not to be an asshole when you're incentivized to be one. And
now, I'll tell you something. You can look at our show and make an assessment, whether it's on YouTube, like the format of this program, the rigor that we demand on this program. You can look at our numbers and see why it's taken so long for this show to grow. And just even the number of views that we get on YouTube. And I should add, The Banality of Evil, incidentally, was a book written by Hannah Arendt about the Adolf Eichmann trial. And yes, there were sort of some broader lessons, but it's an interesting thing to bring up in the context of explaining me that what I'm doing is evil.
And in the context of defending people who do race science.
Right.
From
right.
meanness.
It's a little bit coincidence.
Sam said Charles Murray was the most unfairly maligned man of his lifetime.
It's evil of me to malign him. It's just like, or let's put it this way. If someone was going to do a book on me, they would title it in the same way you would title, let's say, what Adolf Eichmann did, who basically arranged the trains for the Holocaust. Let's play another segment, because even though I'm going to do a whole show on it, they spent, I don't know, about 20 minutes returning to the problem of the evil Sam Seder.
But they don't want to talk about you, though.
I understand. I'm forcing them to.
Just backing up everything, slowing it down, trying to listen. Ben and I have gotten sideways a few times. To his
talking
credit,
about Ben
every
Shapiro.
time I take something to Ben Shapiro, he'll think better of himself, and he'll come.
Yeah, no, I mean that's my experience as well.
Even though red meat is part of his business.
Yeah. No, that counts for a lot. So the place where we've reached some kind of bad faith singularity,
right,
is where I think, okay, there's we just have to cut our losses. There's no conversation. That's why I would never talk to Sam Seder in a public forum. He's proven himself so committed to the singularity. I mean, it's like there's a bunch of there's maybe 20 people who are just on this part of the landscape where there's no coming back from it. I mean, there's coming. Obviously, there's an appropriate any conversation that would have to happen would have to begin with an actual apology. I'm like, it's just so bad. There's no alternate movie version that's exculpatory, right? These people know they're lying. They're avidly lying. It's all malicious. It's all Saul Alinsky. It's all just smear. Well, it is Saul.
It is Saul Alinsky. Right. But look, the best that can be said for it, and again, I don't get along with it,
right,
is I believe that they think that they're in desperate times, and they believe that desperate times call for desperate measures. And that's sort of the mindset, which is the ridicule is necessary to stop a greater evil. And that entitlement, as soon as you start experimenting.
But ridicule is not the problem. It's the line that's the problem. It's you can if it's an honest joke
can I be honest?
At somebody's expense.
I've probably watched 45 minutes of Sam Seder total.
Yeah, well, that's more than I've watched, but I've watched enough to know that these.
Pause it. So these two guys, after talking about me over the course of 10, 15 minutes, saying that I am singularly, there's 20 of us who are singularly liars, so beyond the pale that we can't even be taught. We're like the untouchables. And they have based this
like bad faith
on between the two of them on almost, not quite, 90 minutes worth of video that they have supposedly watched. I would bet that it's even less.
Well, they've also read Saul Alinsky.
And they've read Saul Alinsky.
To be fair, you did name your son after him.
That is also true, actually. There's no doubt in my mind they've read more Saul Alinsky than I have.
Then maybe anybody. I've read a lot of books. I've never read Saul Alinsky.
But and the last time you heard this was actually when what's her face? I can't even remember. Palin. This was the big Palin talking point, the Tea Party talking point. They're all reading Saul Alinsky. I have never read Saul Alinsky. But be that as it may, the idea that I'm such a singular liar and the fact that they could be so sure of this after watching almost 90 minutes of my videos combined, when we do every day a 2.5 hour show. I've done over 2,000 shows. Maybe we're up to 3,000 shows. That is pretty stunning.
I wonder if between the two,
that's like math, as Eric would say.
I wonder if they could link to one of those segments between the two of them.
One maybe say what some of the lies actually are.
You'd think you'd have at least one lie that would be there.
If it's so easy in 45 minutes, you can find one. Let's find one.
Yeah, I'm curious. You don't have to, it's not like you have to look through a haystack, and they're not apparently needles. You have 45 minutes, and I've got it. If I'm a singular lying force, that should be fairly easy to present.
The bad faith singularity.
Exactly. Continue. I'm just curious as to where this is going. Oh, I know where it's going. I'm psychopathic.
But ridicule is not the problem. It's the line that's the problem. It's right. You can if it's an honest joke at somebody's expense.
I've probably watched 45 minutes of Sam Seder total.
Yeah, well, that's more than I've watched, but I've watched enough to know that these are people who, when they're trafficking in audio of my podcast that's been edited to show the opposite of what I was saying, and they get 1,000 blistering comments telling them about this, they keep the audio up, or they don't. Well, they never correct an error.
I agree, but that's what's coming out of it.
That's psychopathic behavior. You know, it's like whether or not they're psychopaths, they're acting like
psychopaths. But then we've got a giant chunk of our world, and in part a lot of the.
Wow, there you go. Psychopathic behavior. What audio podcast have we played of his that we have cut up or somebody's cut up the audio that is false?
I mean, if people want to check how we treated his conversation with Ezra Klein over Charles Murray, we took a lot of audio from that. So, I mean, I think we did a pretty good job with it.
They seem like...
We manufactured Ezra Klein's voice in that one, though. That was a big mistake. We shouldn't have done that.
Well, they're intentionally conflating what they might perceive as ad hominem attacks with actual arguments. And they're saying, because you make what they see as ad hominem attacks or ridicule in addition to actual arguments, that invalidates your arguments. But as we learned from Ben Burgess, the two actually have very little relationship to one another. You can be a total dick and still be right.
Yeah, exactly. I have I'm not going to try and argue that I'm not a total dick. But the idea that they build their whole foundation of who they are on this notion of I'm going to have Murray on my podcast just because other people are criticizing him. I'm going to have race-based IQ science and feature it to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. That's okay. But a guy who's rude or I pretend lies, the reason why they label me in this way is because they don't want to actually have an exchange of ideas with someone who vehemently disagrees with some of the positions they've taken. That's why they do this. And the only way they can justify it to their audience is to claim that I'm beyond the pale.
And even if we want to take this away from you for a second, Sam Harris also said he won't talk to Ta-Nehisi Coates because he plays the race card too much.
Ta-Nehisi Coates also, I'm sure, spends a lot of time editing Sam Harris's podcast. And as much as Sam Harris wanted that apology, I apologize to Dave Rubin. Where's the critique of Dave Rubin? I mean, it's unbelievable. And the idea, these guys, they will only do this. Like, there's a reason why Eric Weinstein pulled a clip from our show when Billy Bragg was on and went and said, I want to debate you, Billy Bragg. I want to come on your stage at one of your music shows to debate you. And I was like, Eric, why don't you debate me? You and I had an hour-long conversation on the phone that ostensibly was a prelude to you seeing if I was worthy of having an exchange of ideas. But the thing is, for these guys, you have to have a platform that you're going to be able to leverage to bring you more celebrity or more money. That's the two things that they require. And they all know that I do not represent that to them. That they don't have an ability. Like, I'll go to someone who's not involved in politics, or I should say is not, their politics is, their audience is not as politically aware. They're just politically aware enough that I can reach them. So I can go on stage with Billy Bragg, and there's going to be some segment out there where I'm going to seem reasonable to. But if I go into Sam Seder's show, there's a chance that I won't be able to milk anybody from that. Or if Sam Seder comes on my show, I'm not going to be able to I'm going to be questioned about things that I don't want to be questioned about. I'm going to be put on a spot where I don't want to be put on a spot. And so what we have to do is deem, it's not just me. There's others. I'm sure they do this too. I have to deem him an untouchable. And therefore, I can totally dismiss the idea of having any exchange with him. People can go back and look at what the first exchange I had with Sam Harris on Twitter was. See what they think. This is a guy, incidentally, who publishes, when he had an exchange with Chomsky, he wanted to debate Chomsky badly. And he had a private exchange with Chomsky. He said, do you mind if I publish these things? Chomsky said, yeah, I don't think it's appropriate. That's not what we're doing here. And then he went ahead and published them. That seemingly is. But that's not bad faith. That's good faith.
That's the good faith singularity.
That's the singularity of good faith. The world deserves to know my private exchange with you. Unbelievable.